Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the day we've all been waiting for, the all-rise discussion with Deputy Chief Justice Emeritus Dikgang Moseneke Grootman from Tshwane, Phelandaba. Finally, he's here in the University of the People, the People's University at Tshwane University of Technology. I'm going to allow the Deputy Chief Justice Emeritus and my guest as well, the panelist, Prof. Masrimule, to greet us all so that we can be able to set the tone for our discussions tonight. Good evening, good evening, good evening, Judge. Good evening, sir.
I'm most grateful to be here. Let me very briefly pay my respects to Professor Masrimule and indeed to everybody who is here and listening and or watching. It's a privilege. And I'm going to abide by the orders of you who will be moderating. And judges normally give orders, but this time I'm ready to receive orders. And as and when you call me, I will be available to do that. I'm on with humility.
Yes, thank you very much. Prof. Masrimule, welcome as well.
Thank you.
Audience and the judge.
Thank you so much, Kukuletu. Greetings to you, Justice Dikgang Moseneke. It's a great honor to interact with you virtually to talk about your very interesting book, and also I greet the visual audience. Thank you so much, Kukuletu, for hosting us this evening.
Thank you. Welcome to the talk, which is hosted by Student Affairs and Curriculum Development at Tshwane University of Technology. We really want to appreciate our leader, the acting DVC, Dr. Ntangeni, who has allowed us this opportunity to engage in this wonderful discussion. But without this book, we wouldn't be having this discussion tonight. This is the second installment, second book that Justice Moseneke has written, and it's been making waves. I've tried to go through many comments, many conversations that the judge has had with many people in different universities, and I realized that it's about time that we must have this conversation at Tshwane University of Technology, especially looking at the history of the justice himself. Let me remind you, let me just do some housekeeping for all of us. We are live on TUT Facebook. If you want to make a comment on the TUT Facebook page. And also we are live on the BUA campus newspaper page. Also, you can make the comments and then we'll be able to pick up all the comments that people will be making, and then we'll have a wonderful conversation with you. Judge, let's get down to it. Let's get down to it. It's very exciting. Actually, I have my copy of the book right here today because it's been exciting. Each time I read a chapter, I get so excited. But maybe before we get into too much conversation, because what we will do today, we will allow the judge to address us, take us through the overview of the book, and then we'll allow Prof. Masrimule to at least respond. And then after that, we'll be taking questions and then engaging. Hopefully, we'll be taking questions as well from our audience on Facebook and other platforms in the university. Judge Wetu, you know, we are happy as Tshwane, our very own person from Tshwane, our very own judge. I'm a hot man in Atteridgeville. They usually say, hot man. We are so excited today as TUT. But take us through the book. Why did you decide to write a book, a second book, a memoir about your work as a judge in the South African courts, different courts? That's why, because you've served at different courts, from low level to high level, in the Pinnacle Court. And then later I'm going to ask you a question, but I don't want to bring it now. What is this book about? Why did you decide to write this wonderful memoir, Baba?
Again, thank you ever so much, and thank you to Professor Masrimule, who will be the respondent later, and to the university I have a long connection. You know, I was chancellor of the university for 5 years, and I have a portrait very specially commissioned by the university, which hangs in a place of pride in my home, Motswani. So it is wonderful. Let me just first express I was a little disappointed that the university did not invite me. Most universities did, but this one did not until now. But then now is the moment, and it's a special moment. Now, one of the biggest struggles in a long fight against oppression is amnesia, is forgetfulness. It's the risk that we run all the time when I talk about who we are, where we come from, how did we land where we have landed, and it becomes then pivotal that some amongst us should retreat into a little corner and seek to record from their little vantage point what it was that happened. Now, in the first book, of course, I run through my personal history intertwined with the history of our struggle for freedom and liberation. I indeed start from Atteridgeville, being arrested there, going to Robben Island, and fighting through all of those processes, come June 1676, come until we get to 1994. But this book was meant to say, we made certain changes in 1994, and law was used as a tool of oppression. We create a democracy. I'm not saying it is perfect, but we did start a democracy in 1994. And we established institutions. And I was one of those who were part of the judiciary of our land. And it was important, therefore, to document what it is that we sought to do. And the book starts off with reminding you that the laws that I had to study when I settled on Robben Island were a colonial imposition. They were not laws that we, our forefathers, had devised. And there were such laws, indigenous law. These were laws which were made law and were told they were common to all of us. Hence, they were called the common law. And I'm on Robben Island. I'm convicted. I'm studying. And at the same time, I'm a freedom fighter. But I had to pass English 1, Afrikaans Netherlands 1, Latin 1. And the reason was that the sources for these laws were all foreign, as those languages were foreign. So that was a cue for me as a young man, very young, from Atteridgeville, that I'm going to study law that actually has been imposed through the colonial process from 1652 onwards. And as and when, therefore, it was important to tell our children, our young people, as we talk about the common law and mercantile law and whatever else, we must know that they are an incident of our oppression. They come with our subjugation. And if we have that understanding, we would then want to keep only what is good and throw away what is bad of those laws. In other words, we mustn't have a hallowed view that everything we receive is wonderful. Clearly not. So the book starts there. And it goes to the point where I decide after 1994 that I don't want to become a judge. I've just become free. I'm in my 40s. I feel young, and this is time to explore the world and make the world my oyster. I was born a slave, and now I'm free. And then I get all sorts of pressures being pulled back and told you must go back to your core calling, which is the judiciary. And I document that to a point where when Tate Mandela came in there, and I remember him saying, Dikgang, Mtanam, your people need you. It was his way of saying, stop business and then go into the law and go and practice, because I was a senior counsel. I was a seasoned lawyer. I'd had the opportunity of helping to write the interim constitution, and I was a freedom fighter. So all of those things were sitting in one place. And I explained to you in the book how we moved on in 1994. And I tell you the state of the judiciary. And I tell you that essentially it was male dominance, white male toxicity was all over it. There was one woman who was the judge in 1994. For those of you who don't know, and it's important to say it. And look how much we have done to introduce women, for instance, into the judiciary. The only Black people who were in the judiciary were in the homelands, except for Chief Justice Mohammed, who was a judge, who jumped the gun a little early. But as for everybody else, all judges were male, were white, and probably 70% of them were Afrikaans speaking. So you basically, the question was, if you introduce a new constitution, who will adjudicate over it? Who will give it life? Who will interpret it in ways that will be consistent with the kind of society that we wanted? And then we therefore required to create the constitutional court. So I give you the history of the courts, how they were, how male-centric and white male-centric they were, and how it was vital that we produce our own in order to be able to interpret the Constitution the way we do. Then I give you the history and the challenges of the Constitutional Court, and with the Supreme Court of Appeal on the other side. Most of its judges were judges of yesteryear. They believed in the common law in an undiluted way, Roman Dutch law. And they saw the constitutional strain of the law as an intrusion. And I try and take you through those steps and to show you that, in fact, it was an extension of our struggle for a just and open and democratic society. I'll go through the tensions between the two courts, how law was viewed to be two laws, the common law, the old law, and the new law, and how we actually battled our way through there. And I show you the three main phases of the courts we had, and the Constitutional Court in particular. But before I do that, I tell you of my stay at the High Court, the work of the High Court. I tell you about the work of the magistracy. I tell you how important the magistracy is, because 80% of all cases actually end up at the magistrate's court level. So you can see it's a very important forum, which we need to give attention and dignity and improve, so that we don't look up to the high courts only when the actual justice is meted out or failed to be meted out at the magisterial level. And then I move on to the High Court. I show you how it works and how we attempted to change it. And I move to the Constitutional Court. And there I spend a lot of time with Akaba to tell you just how we began to change things. For instance, one of the first things we did was to change the gowns. Unfortunately, we ended up with that green, which I hate. As I say in the book, I don't like that green gown, you know? And once I got there at authority, then we put in red strips, we putting it black, we put in a bit of white, just to save it, because it was all green. I don't know where it came from, but anyway, green was always part of our national colors. And then we did a lot of changes in the court. For instance, we lowered the level of the court bench where the judges sit, so that they must be at eye level with counsel. And I record how we battled to change the culture, to free ourselves from the past. We abolished the address of my lord and my lady, for instance, the Constitutional Court. And we just called people justice. I'm Justice Tigang Senek. That's enough honor. So, you know, we abolished, and I write about that in the book, abolished the notions of my lord, my lady, the honorable so-and-so. I am honorable through my deeds, through what I do, through what you see me do. That's what makes me honorable, not the title. And then I move to the jurisprudence and show you how we had to cut through most of the apartheid laws, how we struck down a lot of the common law that was inconsistent with the Constitution. And this was quite an attempt. First, the Chaskelson Court, and then followed by the Langa Court, in which I was the Deputy Chief Justice in the Langa Court. And then came the Ngobo Court, where again I was Deputy Chief Justice. And then came the Mogoeng Court, and there again I was Deputy Chief Justice. So I've been deputizing for 3 Chief Justices in the same court. And in that time also, Kaba, I wrote some of the finest judgments which you teach up to this day in the law schools. So, and I described to you how the court works, the discipline, the hard work, the research, and how the jurisprudence must produce justice, not just law. When you say law is an S, I mean, we're talking rubbish. The law should never be an S. The law should always produce just outcomes, because that is what it is about. It's about justice, not just about rules. It's a big difference between rules and justice. And therefore, our new brand of jurisprudence, I try and write about it there. I have light moments in the book. I tell you little stories between judges. I don't want to get to that now. I tell you about may God bless you, and other judges saying, hey, look, some of us are atheists, don't talk about God, you know? And I explain that amongst judges, there are 3 topics which are not discussed in the tea room, okay? And those are quite well known. Certainly it's politics, religion, and sex. So those 3 judges never touch in the tea room, because you just never know where they're going to end and how different we're going to be. And we're a new court, so we never touched any of those 3 things. And some that Justice Mogoeng wasn't quite alive to, that we don't talk religion in amongst judges. Some were Muslims, some were Hindu, some were African adherents, religion adherents, and not everybody was a fundamental Christian. And it's a very important thing, because our world is wide. It's wider than what we adhere to, valuable as what we adhere to might be. And then I take you through the book and the jurisprudence through the 3 eras, and go right to the end, and write then in conclusion for the young people of our country. And in it, I conclude by reminding them of the importance of our democracy, how we have to keep it in place. Having written a little bit about life as a Dimeni and the pain that I had personally at a time when all pain should generally be away, at least pain caused by us should be away from us. And I describe as a retired judge, that was quite painful. And I tell about the fun I had going around the world, being invited to teach at different universities, and as some form of, and of course the accolades that my land universities, starting with your university and other universities, and as have accorded on one. So it is a story of our nation, told from my spectacles, where I stood. And I hope there'll be many other. There are almost no judicial memoirs in our country. We have no culture of judges opening up. And I was very determined to lift the judicial skirt, the judicial gown, so that people could see. That is why, and finally I'll stop there, the book is written for you young people. And I say to you, my prayer is that if one day you get oppressed, if one day there's no democracy, and there's no freedom, and there's no dream, your dream's not being fulfilled, I pray that you must know it, and you must all rise. In other words, you must not, and that's the double meaning of the book. It's about all rise as in court, but it's also about all our young people rejecting exclusion and oppression, and insisting on being treated fairly, justly in a democratic setting. There is an overview of the book. There's a lot of detail which I can hardly handle now, but I'm open to questions. And I hope young people will wrap up, switch off their TVs and take the actual book and read it. That will give me a lot of satisfaction. Ke a leboga.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Justice Moseneke. You've wrapped it up very well. And, you know, the more you speak is the more I see all the pages in the book. That's why we are making a commitment as a university that we'll buy a lot of copies of the book, and we are going to use them as part of the workshops that we hold with our students so that we can make them aware of the content and also entice them. I'm happy that Prof. Masirimule is here because Prof. Masirimule's environment is the Executive Dean of Humanities. He runs, their duty is trying to establish a fully fledged School of Law. And for the first time, we've started offering a national diploma, a diploma in law. So we are trying to build up in the future to have an LLB and LLM so that we can have lawyers emerging from the universities of technology as well. So it's going to be one of the things that we are going to try and drive in the Faculty of Humanities. That's why Prof is here. But before saying a lot of things, I'm going to allow Prof to respond, and then we have a few questions that have been sent to us, and people are beginning to send them to us as well on our Facebook page and other platforms. Prof Mashupe Masirimule, one of the young professors, emerging superstars in the academic field. Prof,
thank you very much, Kukuletu. Justice Moseneke, how do I respond to you? Except to say that thank you very much for sharing your life with us in this beautifully written judicial memoir. Earlier book, my own justice, and obviously to many others, are expression of generosity. This is because they teach us the virtue of selflessness in the service of humanity. Their instructional value lies in their teaching of how to be a quintessential being shaped by the altruism in every human endeavor for the good of society. You chronicle the story of your life, which in a big way shaped the course of history. I'm happy, Justice, that you started off by cautioning us against amnesia. Indeed, your book seeks to protect us against this disease. I can only say how lucky we are that you live amongst us as the embodiment of the lesson of what it means to be a servant of the people, and how lucky is posterity that you could bequeath to it the lesson of your life as generously shared in your inspiring memoirs. All rise is what is the subject of the discussion this evening. However, I need to emphasize that to fully appreciate it, you must also read Justice Moseneke's My Own Liberator. I must say, Justice Edwin Cameron, whom you work with at the Constitutional Court, could not be more correct in the foreword to your book in saying that you are one of the last significant links to the Chakalson Court. Of course, Justice Chakalson, Justice Cameron referred to those 11 justices that President Nelson Mandela appointed in 1994 to serve in the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa as the custodian of our constitutional democracy, a duty they executed with diligence and a sense of patriotism. We owe them a debt of gratitude. And thank you so much that all rise. When I read it, it reminds us of this. In other words, this book is as much about you, Justice, as it is about all those who worked along with you on the bench, in whom the history of this country is written. I can only say that you are all worthy of emulation. I had an opportunity, Justice, to read the book. There is no way that I would have missed it. And I must again also agree with Judge Cameron, as he wrote in his preface, that you managed to ingeniously situate yourself as the protagonist in the legal history of South Africa, including how you explain the roots of our constitutional democracy, the mind of a judge, and the workings of the court. The book is good for those that study law. The book is good for political scientists. The book is good for everybody. And I'm happy that earlier, Mr. Traba emphasized that this book ought to be bought for our students because it's so beautifully written. You did all this with extraordinary cogency that in our midst this late afternoon, we have young people who you specifically directed your message to. And they are here to listen to you, Justice. And it's important that they get it from the horse's mouth of how, as a young man, the system threw you in jail. You turned this into an opportunity. You went to prison at the age of 15 for your political activism without matric. You're a dropout, Judge. And you came back from prison armed with a law degree. Without any doubt, this is a profound message to our young people in your book, which is in the same vein as that which the Argentine-born revolutionary theorist Che Guevara communicated to young people in 1960. He challenged them to work hard physically and intellectually. He challenged them to learn to be disciplined. He challenged them to become revolutionists of action, fearlessly taking their place in the front lines of struggle, small and large. He further said to them, more importantly, that as they grow and change through these experiences, they must read widely and study seriously. I am emphasizing this, Justice, because this talk about your book this afternoon, this late afternoon, takes place at the university where young minds are shaped and hopefully are to take leave from your story. This is because as a professor, when I interact with them, all what I want eventually is to see them being responsible citizens contributing to society. I must say your book, Justice, came in handy as your exemplary life, as told in it from a young age, assists greatly in molding these young people that we are busy trying to shape their life. From wanting to be a traffic cop, for which your aunt laughed at you, to your ambition of being a medical doctor at some point, but eventually you ended up being a fine jurist. What a remarkable life, which is the subject of the book we are talking about this afternoon. Justice, I can see in your book that, in fact, for you to decide to be a lawyer, prison made you to choose law, and you became good at it. You were only a judge of the High Court for 1 or 2 years, and immediately thereafter you got nominated to serve in the Constitutional Court. What a remarkable achievement. And I'm curious to share with us the feeling that you had when you were elevated to the apex court. And also, Justice, I could see that as the student of law, you had already started to battle with jurisprudential basis of the law you were studying, where in a nutshell, the question you were asking yourself was, whose law is it in any case? And you answered this question. It was the law of the English, it was the law of the Roman Dutch, it was the common law. I found this level of consciousness at that early age in your life very profound, in that you had already started to ask a epistemic question of jurisprudence. This is the question that today legal scholars are still battling with, hence the call for the decoloniality of the science of law. I'm curious, Justice, whether this consciousness was linked to your Pan-Africanist ideological orientation, which had landed you in Robben Island. Your travails continue after you got released from prison. You battled to get into the bar. You never gave up. You never gave up, despite all the impediments that the system put in place. Where did that tenacity come from? I am curious, Judge. And also, as I interact with your book, I sense that even after democracy, colonial and apartheid shibboleths are still inherent parts of the membership of the bar, including many colonial practices and rituals in the judiciary that just simply refuses to go away. Because of this, the question I ask is, how difficult it is, Justice, to just simply dispense of all this? I'm asking this question fully aware of the point that we made earlier, that the Constitutional Court decided not to use colonial titles, my lord, my ladies, but you simply resorted to justice. And I like how you explain the significance of this part of the history of the Constitutional Court, which of course, I think it was inevitable because the larger part of your life indeed was in the Constitutional Court. That is why you really went to town in giving the history of the Constitutional Court. In theorizing, in historicizing the Constitutional Court, including demonstrating the complexity of transition from the interim constitution to the current constitution, you also tell the story of South Africa's democratic project. I could not help it, Judge, but burst into laughter as when I was reading the book, I came across a part which talked about how both Justice Ismail Mohammed of the Supreme Court of Appeal then and President Arthur Chackerson of the Constitutional Court then jostled to sow in President Mbeki. This is because at that time, the constitutional framework created some sort of dual leadership insofar as the head of the judiciary was concerned. This is but one of many nuances in our history which one cannot get in the mainstream literature as written by those who were not part of the process of making this important history. This history of the Constitutional Court, you talk about it as you're giving the overview, is disaggregated according to those who headed the court. The first part of the history focuses on the Chackerson Court, the second part on the Langa Court, the third part on the Gobo Court, and the last part on Mogoeng Court. Justice, I'm tempted to ask, which among these epochs was dramatic? And why among these epochs, the recent Moseneke epoch, I'm perhaps being naughty to ask this question, as probably by now you are tired of answering it. However, many people out there, Justice, refer to you as the Chief Justice South Africa never had. In explaining how the Constitutional Court works, you also lucidly explain South Africa's judicial system, the extent to which the book goes in covering a wide range of issues, portray its description as a memoir. It looks at some of the matters that Constitutional Court had considered, which sought to spawn a new beginning insofar as our constitutional democracy is concerned, including the first case where the death penalty was declared unconstitutional. It was the Makwanyane case. You also show how the court paid a closer attention to the question of socio-economic justice. And this is critically important. How government was forced to make the Nevera pin to those who had HIV/AIDS. You also talk about the Shope matter, the relationship between the judiciary and the executive, which had deteriorated, life esidimeni, and you are on retirement. As I conclude, Justice, I want to ask you a direct question. As you are writing this book, did you ask President Mbeki why did he not want your report, which you wrote with Sisi Kampepe about the Zimbabwean elections? Thank you so much, Judge. I really enjoy reading the book. This is the book that each and every South African ought to read if we want to understand where we come from, where we are going. Thank you so much, Judge Moseneke. Justice Moseneke, and thank you very much, Mr. Chava.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'm sure, Justice, you read the book, right? You went home about it, and that's the kind of academics we desire in South Africa. Not people who are building bridges and they collapse. Not people who are getting 50% but with a score at school and suddenly they are supposed to preside over everything that is important in society. So thank you very much, Prof, for taking this task so serious today. Judge, I will start with you with the questions. I'm sure some of the things that Prof Mashupe has been throwing, you found them to be quite interesting, and then I'll go to some of the questions which are being asked on Facebook. Let me tell you, social media is on fire tonight. Social media is on fire. We're having the Deputy Chief Justice Emeritus, Dikgang Moseneke, with us. Judge, over to you just to respond to some of the comments that have been made by Prof.
Let me start off by saying, Tobela, Professor Masirumule, the ultimate reward of a writer is to have even one person read the book. That is an ultimate reward, because that is the ultimate interaction and satisfaction that you get having pulled together a work such as this, experimental in many ways, difficult to be completely explicit and candid, and still succeed to engender some kind of excitement and enthusiasm that you've shown, Professor Galevora. I mean, it is truly rewarding. You ask a number of difficult questions, and precisely because you have read the book, you know it backwards and forwards, and I could sense that without a doubt at all. There are indeed difficult questions that you raise, and I don't pretend that I'm being able to answer all of them. But let me say to you, the notion of colonial imposition is one that would come strongly, and you're right, particularly if you have an Africanist background like I have. And a Pan-Africanist outlook is not a party political outlook. It's a world view. For instance, Thabo Mbeki and I are fellow Pan-Africanists in the sense that we believe that Africa will rise. We believe that our people will find their mojo and their moment is not far and will be here, and that we ought to self-define. That's a beautiful word. That's Setswana. Ka Setswana re motho wa ikhaloganya. Go ikitse, go itseba. I mean, you find it in different African languages or Sesotho languages. Go ikhaloganya is to self-identify, to know who you are. And that's a very important point of departure. So, yes, that Africanist notion, whose law is it in any event? You're quite right. That was the question I was asking. And I had to, remember during our time with LLB, I had to pass private law 5, mercantile law 3, criminal law 3, and there's something else 5 simultaneously. You have to pass them at the same sitting, go UNISA, otherwise you can't get an LLB. So it was a gate. So I was asking, as I was battling to do private law 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over 5 years, you know what I mean? Mercantile law 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I was asking, whose law is it? It came naturally because I was a freedom fighter and I sought to. And it's a consciousness, a jurisprudential question that I would like our children to ask all the time. Because law is an incident of power. It's an incident of societal relations. Our understanding and our relationship, for instance, with women arises from the context and the power relations we find in society. So new law students and other students in other disciplines, because we now study intersectionally, should understand that law is an instrument. It's not absolute. It's a tool to produce good outcomes in society. And my question always was, are these the best outcomes? The one that Roman Dutch law prescribes? Are these the best outcomes that the mercantile law prescribed? Or were they responsive to, for instance, the Elizabethan era, where colonialism was at its highest point? For instance, I'm talking too much now, but the notion, for instance, of ownership as being absolute to the owner is foreign to African notions of ownership. Because our ownership has always been communal, shared, and use has been more important than the notion that it is my property. So in short, I was really asking the question I would ask later, which is, we have to make laws that best reflect the dream that we have set for ourselves. And not a dream that's preset, for instance, in the 16th century, when Grotius or van der Linde or those people wrote, but what is it that we want now? It's the way of freeing ourselves to think of the law afresh and anew, and that was an imposition. What is it that we want? And that helped me. If you go look at the judgments I wrote, I was free and open to articulate the law as I think our people expect it to be, and the Constitution expect it to be. It was a long answer, but it's quite a foundational question that you ask, Professor. It goes to the heart of epistemology as well as the heart of understanding. There are other questions which are, I think, it was exciting to be appointed to the Constitutional Court. No, Mr. Mbeki and I have never talked about Zimbabwe, but we once had a debate which was oblique, which I never talk about in public, where he said, Justice, have you ever thought about, and he appointed me, though we differed, and he trusted my judgment, because we did differ about Zimbabwe. He felt that we've got to support President Mugabe for better or for worse. I felt that he must be supported only when he does the right thing. African presidents cannot be immunized from criticism and scrutiny only because they're African. No. They must be immunized from scrutiny. I mean, they must never be immunized from scrutiny. And what they do, and what the African continent is largely because of leaders who have dismally failed to execute the mandate of the people. And we are the ones who should be making that criticism. And once the elections were not fair, once I saw all the violence and all the things we saw with Justice Kampepe in Zimbabwe, I was not prepared to declare the elections free and fair. Because in my judgment and what I'd seen, I was on the ground there for 3 months, they were not free and fair. And our President Mbeki said, Justice, it's not about law only, it's also about peace. There's an intersection between law and peace. But we didn't talk about Zimbabwe directly, but there was the debate, which you see in the book also. Do we ever get to a point where we sacrifice justice, being afraid that there will be an uprising or a coup, or Mugabe will never agree to justice trumping power? So we never talked with Ndati Mbeki about that, and we remain good comrades and understanding where our people ought to go up to now.
No, Thank you very much, Judge. There's a lot of people online. We are greeting them, and they're asking some of the questions, which I'll be bringing to you. Some of the questions. One of the questions in another platform is, at 15, you went to prison for Pan-Africanism. You believed in Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanist of note. Has Pan-Africanism failed in South Africa? Does it have hope? That's another question that we have. Another one, it's have we deferred from the dream of the kind of liberation that we wanted to have in South Africa? Like you are saying, you wanted even our laws to reflect the best dreams that our people had about the future of freedom. Do you think our freedom project is intact, or have we lost it as this country?
Well, there are two questions which are exciting, both of them. Yes, I'm an Africanist to the core. And again, not to confuse Africanism with party political adherence. Of course, I grew up in the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. Of course, I was trained in there. And I went to prison being an adherent thereof. And I rose to its leadership ranks. And I have no qualms and regrets about it. And it's Pan-Africanism, Africanist Pan-Africanism now, more than ever before. We can't define our dreams in the narrow sense of power only. Nor does power translate into freedom and what is good for our people. So the Pan-Africanist dream is one that places African people at the center of outcomes. It begins with the interest of African people as pivotal and vital in their worldview and the way they analyze the world around them. Of course, you can never start with the European wishes. It must be African wishes. And Pan-Africanism hopes for a united Africa. And when I grew up, the first objective was to overthrow white domination. And to the extent that it exists anywhere else, that dream must surely still remain and be important. And in it, you must understand colonialism. So it's a very fundamental worldview. And when I travel, let me tell you, it helped me negotiate and make a lot of decisions when I had to make them. Whether to steal or not to steal from my people, whether to lie or not to lie from my people, whether to serve them with sincerity and honesty and over years. Those are, whether or not to declare the elections in Zimbabwe free and fair or not. So its starting point is the supremacy of the people themselves, African people in particular, and their supreme interests. When, for instance, we don't have economic progression, you know who suffers. We know who are the poorest of us. If we don't have effective land distribution and ownership in our land of birth, we know who's doomed, don't we? If we don't have effective education, we know who's doomed. So it's a long answer to the question. Yes, Pan-Africanism is alive and well. If you talk about party political configurations, let me just suggest this to you. They come and go. I've lived long enough to know that political parties are like human beings. They are born, they grow, they live, and they die. That is a fundamental trajectory, and live long enough, you will see it. You can just go to Zambia and go and look. UNIP was born, it fought a liberation struggle, it lived, and it died. The National Indian Congress was born for the colonial struggle, it lived, and today has 2 seats in the parliament of 800 in India. So amnesia, African people have to respect history, have to respect what is around them. So there's a difference between a worldview, e.g. an Africanist worldview, and a vehicle, the vehicle that carries that view. So the vehicle may puncture sometimes, but the views themselves rarely puncture. I hope there is an answer to some of your listeners, and I thank them for the question. It's a lovely question.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Prof, I want to allow you as well to come in after I've asked one question, because I can see the way you look that you want to do follow-ups on another issue. Justice, you say there must be, who will guard the guardians? Who will guard the guardians? There's a Judge Hlophe matter. Somebody's asking that. It's saying in paragraph 179, in page 179, the last paragraph of page 179, you're saying on the 9th of, you're talking about Judge Hlophe, that this thing has been lingering for 12 years since he's been accused of acting unethically. This person says on the 9th of April, 2021, Judicial Conduct Tribunal finally made a decision on this matter, finding J.P. Hlophe guilty of gross misconduct into Section 177 of the Constitution. Are the complainant judge is vindicated of what is next for Judge Hlophe? That's the question. Do you think they have vindicated the ones who said, no, we can't keep quiet about this thing? This is wrong. This man, what he's doing is trying to push us to a particular conclusion. Do you think they have vindicated? Do you think they've done the right thing?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. In the book, I could not get that far, precisely because I'm a trained judge and a disciplined cadre of the judiciary. So I did not get into the outcome. I waited for it. I was one of the potential witnesses, and the outcome is there, and we are done. What remains for the JSC to do what it has to do by law? We were complainants, and we handed it over to the tribunal. The tribunal made a decision, and we stopped right there. And it was important to defend the institution we worked in. Institutions matter. And the day Africans embrace that and learn that, it's going to be important. Universities matter. Courts matter. Prosecution arms matter. The army matters. All those institutions, we can't weaken and we can't destroy, except at our own peril.
No, that's quite interesting. The other question is, in the light of the recent interviews held by JSC for various positions in the judiciary, specifically the SCA and Concord, do you think we still have a caliber of judges in the league of the former Deputy Chief Justice? Do you think I'm sure you've watched it on TV, all those interviews and the likes. The people are asking, do you think we have the kind of caliber? Do you have the people with the heart, the spirit, and everything that is needed to take this dream that we have of having our courts being the institutions of high moral value? Because you're saying they matter. Do you think the kind of people who are being interviewed are at that level?
Yes, the answer must be yes. You see, the temptation of falling into the trap of in my time, it's a big one. I had somebody interviewing Dr. Kumalo, and he was seeing no players in front of him at all. You know what I mean? So one must be quite careful. If you interviewed, Henri for Arsenal and say, do you see any players before you today? He might be tempted to say, not as good as in my time. So I don't want to fall into the in my time trap. But I trust most human beings go through formative stages in their lives, and they take in these values. And the people who are applying now were not moribund. Most of them have read All Rise. Most of them are aware. We were aware of what the Chaskosel Court did. I came in as and when most of them were retiring. They never could have predicted that our court will shoot the lights out, will be such a good court. And some of us will be such good judges, you know what I mean? So we cannot say that the judges that are coming in, younger, less experienced, yes. Will they become good judges? I think yes. I think they will rise to the occasion, and hence the call, all rise. We all have that duty to go out there. So I don't want to condemn the whole judiciary. Wherever we see impropriety, we should really raise our hand. It's so important, as we did at the Constitutional Court, and said, no, not in our name. We can't do this. You know what I mean? It took long. It was a long battle, long fight, nasty fight. People are questioning why we are doing it and why we were not doing it. But in the end, let's protect our institutions. They're for us, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and particularly non-political institutions. You're going to need SARS long after now. So to go and do politics at SARS, it's crazy. We're going to need ESCOM long after now, because we're going to need power, energy, in whatever form. We're going to need water supply. So there are certain things that the nation, we're going to need universities. But Professor Masrumula must always be there. Otherwise, we are gone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Prof, you can come in now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tlaba. The question about the Judicial Service Commission, and I'm asking this question within the context of the interviews that we just had, and I watched them. I made time to really watch them, and that in many ways, some of the questions, at least that is insofar as my opinion is concerned, tend to find fault in the judgment that were made by the judges that appear before the commission, than to establish the fitness of. And at some point also, I was getting a bit uncomfortable when some questions tend to sound and something immediately came to mind to say that isn't perhaps something slightly wrong in how we constitute the Judicial Service Commission? Because remember, in the commission, we do have the politicians, right? Is it not possible that we can completely cut the politicians out of the commission, so that a chief justice should actually be nominated by the fraternity, not a politician, not a president, so that a judge of whatever court could actually be nominated by the Judicial Service Commission or the fraternity in general? I just wanted I just want to get your opinion around that. At least that was my observation based on what I saw during the interviews which just took place. And also, Judge, I want your
Prof, sometimes we miss you. Prof.
Oh, you missed me. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a time where I missed you. Especially, you've asked the first question that talks about whether was it key for the parliamentary committee or the Judicial Commission to focus on the judgments more than focusing on fit for purpose. And then you were coming to the second question. What's the second question? Prof, can you get?
Hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. That I was getting at relates to the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. right? And it's quite interesting that Judge Moseneke dealt with the first case of an executive that went out of work, and that case relates to Mandela, the first president of the Republic. Remember the case of Winnie Mandela, who went to attend a conference without the president's permission, and when she came back, Mandela fired her. And when you called Justice Moseneke to say that I've been fired, come and help me. And President Mandela did not actually follow the constitutional framework that regulated, that governed the government of national unity at that time. And President Mandela lost, but I think for a day, because I think he withdrew the dismissal, he corrected the legal mistake, and he refired Winnie. I found it a very interesting case as it relates to the history in our post-apartheid South Africa, that it relates to the history of the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. But maybe on a serious note, I want to find out from Justice Moseneke that later, as our constitutional democracy matures, we saw so many instances of infractions, particularly from the executive, particularly from the highest office of the land. And at some point, I interacted with one of your powerful presentation elsewhere, where you caution us. I'm not so sure whether you're raising a concern or you were actually bringing it to our attention that the powers that were given to the president are so much. And the question that I want to ask you is, when the Constitution was actually put together, you were defining the various parts of it. Do you leave the powers of the president to be so enormous? So that is another important question that I wanted the Chief Justice to really comment on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'm sure, Justice, you've captured all these questions, or should I summarize?
I've got them.
You were listening the whole day.
I've got them. I want to save you some time. I know that we're running there, and save you also some data. But let's get to the first questions about the JSC, the Judicial Services Commission. It's a new body. It was established in 1994. And in the book, I explained that before 1994, judges were totally politically appointed. The Minister of Justice picked by hand who becomes a judge from the senior council. And that is why, in the end, judges were white males only. And they were the only ones who were senior counsel. Not even white females made the cut. So we wanted to move away from that system and one that is more open. And that's when we decided that there will be a body. It shall be called the Judicial Services Commission. And it shall be representative of society. That is the real principle behind it. And that is why the representatives from Parliament, representatives from the academy, that's why the law professors who sit there, from the advocates profession, the attorneys profession, from the community, etc., from the executive. So all arms of state as well as community are represented there. And the idea was that it should be a collective appointment. And it is so. High Court judges are appointed by the JSC. The president may not refuse to appoint somebody that the JSC has approved. So there was a protection. It was a nice protection we made in 1994. But the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice are handpicked by the president. That was the give. The president can't refuse High Court judges, but the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice, other judges of the Constitutional Court, he must pick from a list, a slate. And he must pick from that. He's obliged to pick from the slate, which has been compiled by the JSC. But the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice are handpicked. The President is given the prerogative to say, Kirata Mang Mang and Kirata Mang Mang. And that is why you can overlook people continuously, because the President has a prerogative. The Constitution allows him to pick he or she he likes. About the functioning of the JSC, of course, we have to be careful. We have to refine it. You're right, we have to look at whether the person is fit for purpose. We could always have different views about judgments that people give, but that is not a sign that they are not fit for purpose. They are only a sign that you don't agree with that outcome of that particular judge in the particular case. But that doesn't make that judge not, fit for purpose. Okay, not fit and proper, as the language of the statute says. So yes, there were unfortunate questions there, and I hope we'll pull back and try and get the JSC to but the principle is right, that it must be representative of everybody, and when we conduct the business, it's a different matter. We have to make sure that we stick to what the law and the Constitution requires of judges. There were many unfortunate questions, I must say. As to the question of yes, executive power is quite widespread. And I've written a published paper on this matter, where I extract all the parts of the president in an academic paper, which is published in a journal. So this is not a political debate. This is a debate on architecture of the Constitution. How is it built? And it is true of any president. But when I published my paper, there was a particular president was there, and people thought I was talking about that president. I'm talking about any president that we have, because we'll have many presidents. It is just a fact of there'll be many deputy chief justices. There'll be many over the years. So I'm just saying, in all of the much praised Constitution, we made an error with the architecture of the Constitution. I was just pointing to that and explaining historically what happened. Every time there was a deadlock between the liberation forces and the government of the past, the resolution was no, leave it to Mr. Mandela, because both trusted that Mr. Mandela will do it right, okay? But not everybody has the same surname as Mandela. So that was part of the difficulty we had. I hope that covers your points, bro. Sure.
Prof, are you fine?
It does, Justice. Thank you so much, Justice. Thank you so much, Tuku.
Yes, indeed. And thanks for asking the questions.
Thank you very much, Prof. When you say the youth must be so sensitized, the people of South Africa should be so sensitized about wrongdoing happening in society. I'm paraphrasing what you're saying in such a way that when they see wrongdoing, they must rise. Are you advocating for young people to rise against their own liberation movements?
I'm advocating for none of that. I'm advocating for a high political and socioeconomic consciousness of society. And that when society does not find joy in its structures, its leadership, its dream that appears to be deferred, and sometimes deferred indefinitely, they should know it when that happens. And they should rise. Indeed, they should take such measures as are necessary to stop that trajectory. So you can't have a trajectory, for instance, of poverty forever. How could you? You can't have a trajectory of undemocratic practice forever. So I plead, as Che Guevara did. You had Professor rightly quoting Che Guevara, you had that the young people are the ultimate guardians of freedom. If they are dead, then whole society is dead. I was 15 and I wouldn't take oppression. I rose and I went to prison. The 1976 youth did not, the youth of 1990 rose, etc. So I'm saying young people. And when they said, fees must fall, I supported students. And I even wrote a paper where I showed that the Constitution expects that there should be access to education, and state must take progressive steps to realize the access to higher education also. You know what I mean? So I stake my faith in young people, and I'll be deeply disappointed if they don't make their point. To rise does not mean to be violent, but to rise means to refuse to accept, refuse to sit down, refuse to accept what is patently wrong and unacceptable.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. There's another question from our online audience. One of our online people says, I'm more interested in asking Justice Musenege's view on the recent views of our current Chief Justice on Israel. Is it healthy to have a Christian fundamentalist as a justice?
Yeah, you can predict that, Clive, but you're not going to get an answer from me, right? I can talk about our Constitution, not about a specific person.
Yes, sir.
We have a non-sectarian Constitution. We have established a state. Let me tell you a bit of history for young people. The apartheid Constitution specifically had the provision that it was a Christian state and that it paid allegiance to the Christian God. Now we know there are many gods, but it is there's one God with many ears, many channels, and therefore ours is a state that does not pretend to be partial on racial matters. And it's one that ought to keep that particular line as a secular state. That explains why, for instance, at one stage, Christian worshiping in schools stopped against a lot of objection. And that's why in public bodies, we talk about a moment of silence, because it's difficult to impose. And if you do impose prayer, then you have to allow everybody to pray in the way they pray. So we have an even-handed state. It is secular, and it ought to allow a free range, and the Constitution says so, a free range for all denominations and for all positions. And I think that's a very important principle that ought to be observed all the time.
And there's another question from Lufuno. He says, ask the judge to make a comment about, does he think the comment he made during a party deprived him of becoming the Chief Justice we never had?
Oh.
Does he regret his comment?
No nonsense. I mean, regret. You must look at the book and you'll see I repeat those comments in my own Liberator. I repeat them in All Rise. Look, let's restate it again. And you'll see how fundamental that comment is. And if it costs one being a Chief Justice, so be it. Fun, good fun. Let's repeat it. It is not what is good for the ruling elite. It is not what is good for the ruling party. It is what is good for the people.
So right? It's not what is good for the ruling party, it's what is good. Okay, what's your view about what's currently happening?
Now, that is fundamental. If any judge did not say that, that is a mantra of every judicial officer.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, of every healthy citizen, that should be the mantra. Surely, I mean, public good is really, and that is why political parties are there. That is why governments are there. is to serve the public good. And I was restating that fundamental principle, which is just so important. On my day of departure from the bench, I repeated the same statement to remind you that what matters can be us. It can be our positions. It must surely be what the people need most. That is core to liberation thinking. And there's no room for regret, not even a little bit. I can't trade that principle for being a Chief Justice. You know what I mean?
But let me ask you again, Judge, can our people really trust the courts in South Africa? Because there seems to be a growing sentiment, in particular when you look at the people who are calling themselves the RET forces, and the ones who are defending their friends, maybe who are being accused about this and that in court. They feel like, but we can't trust these courts. I heard the Secretary General of the ANC recently saying something. He says they must avoid going to, because he's like paranoid that somebody wants to take him to jail so that he can be poisoned, and they are in collaboration with the courts, but suddenly he's going to court. Do you think the courts can be trusted in this country?
Well, you're not going to get me to any of that discussion about and paranoid, and because I'm frankly not interested in and thoroughly bored by party political goings on, right? There are much more important things in this country that have to be done, you know, than all those goings on. I would hope, I think when people are in trouble, they suggest that courts ought not to be trusted. And when they want relief, of course, you must read All Rise. You'll see there's a chapter there of how courts get approached by those who criticize them most. And that is the trend. It's happening even now. Some of the people who suggest the courts are not to be trusted are the ones who are all over the courts. They're the ones who are litigating in the courts. Society needs a dispute resolution mechanism. And the judiciary is that mechanism. It's not about how powerful or important judges are. It's an important task. Let me go to my favorite example. And I hope I see it's nearly 5:20. I'm sure we're going to be wrapping up within the next couple of minutes. Yes. Look, the point is this. Do you want a soccer game? Yes. If you do, you need a referee. If you enjoy soccer, then you need a referee. And once you have a referee, you should have rules. And the referee will blow according to the rules. But every time the referee blows, not everybody agrees with the penalty. In fact, half the stadium will swear at the referee, and the other half will cheer the referee. And this we train young judges. I still do training for judges, and I train them that. If you're a judge, you must read the book. It's not a place where you seek fame. It's not a place where you seek popularity. It's not a place where you seek richness. None of those are got on the bench. So referees, each time they blow, they get castigated. But society needs referees. And if you want to play soccer, you can't have teams blow the whistle for themselves. And must decisions of the referees being abided by? Yes. If not, you can as well break up. You can stop the game. So we're going to continue to have people who say judges are not to be trusted. And you're going to have the same people running to the courts that are the first at the doors of the courts to be able to do that. Are there judgments which are legally wrong? Yes. And in the book, I spend a bit of time to show you that I talk about judicial fallibility. We judges accept judicial fallibility. And for that reason, you can appeal from the magistrate's court to the high court, single judge to full bench, from full bench, the Supreme Court of Appeal, the Constitutional Court. And every time you go up the steps, I explained that in the book, the number of bodies are more, the heads are more. It's one magistrate, it becomes one judge, it becomes 3 judges, it becomes 5 judges, the Supreme Court of Appeal, and 11 in the Constitutional Court. Can you see how many people and eyes are looking at that issue? And the more you make them, the more you try and eliminate error. So it's not a political game, as those who are unhappy at a particular time try to suggest that Judge so-and-so is sitting there. And if you are 11, how do you sway the court in your way? It's not like a rally. You know, when you sing best, you become the leader. No, it's not that kind of thing. It is really about 11 people having to apply their minds and then make a decision by a majority.
Oh, thank you very much, Judge. We're up to 10 minutes before we wrap up our discussion tonight. Like I said earlier, SIA will communicate with your office again, Judge, so that in the presence of students, we can be able to try and extract lessons and use them for leadership development in our university. Maybe let's just go to the issue that you raised earlier of indigenous law in our country. Do you think there's space for further development in our indigenous law? Because I've seen recently when the Zulu king died and subsequently the wife of the king or the queen mother died as well, who was actually supposed to be the one who was holding on the interim while they're identifying the new king. There were lots of discussions of whether, is this right, is this progressive? Do you think there's a space for further evolution in the indigenous law space, especially in the context of our country, South Africa? Should we retain some of these customs, or some of them require some refinement and some changes?
Yes, the answer is yes, there is room and space for indigenous law, but it is, like all things, it can't be static. It must respond to the objective conditions around it. One of the difficulties of indigenous law, and I said a bit about that in All Rise, once we were colonized, it took the backseat. It got stultified and was written or codified by mainly white writers who thought they understood what we are and how we work. For instance, if you go to most of the codes of of indigenous law, women find no place and no shake. They're totally servile and totally dominated by men. In real traditional African societies, we know that women are powerful, don't we? We know mothers are not a throwaway. We know that they have, but so it was codified at a certain point and it died. So yes, we need to pay careful attention. It's a difficult task, but we need to pay careful attention to what are the rules that are bad. Or for instance, the Constitutional Court struck down the rule that says only a male primogeniture rule. Only adult males inherit the whole estate, and they might give something to their younger brothers and sisters. But young women can never, even if they're the eldest, can never inherit the estate. And we struck that rule down and said, everybody should be able to inherit, men or women, for instance. It was a rule that only men can become traditional leaders. And Shulubani case, and it came before us and we said, no, anybody can become a traditional leader. Now I see in Bulubedi, they've turned it all around now and say, no, it can't be women only. Also men can become traditional leaders. In principle, there's nothing wrong with that, except that now women are being removed and men being replaced. But so in short, let's go back to it. Indigenous law is fractured. It's practiced in localized fashion. It is not fully written. It has to be written out. And there should be a debate to allow it to progress. There are wonderful things out of it. For instance, the notions of Ubuntu are incredible. And we have used them sometimes in our jurisprudence to advance it. If you look at the Constitutional Court judgments. Notions of powerful females within families, because they really are. There's something that cannot just happen. Are not going along, or Mami. I mean, they have a place there. They're not all servile. So there are things that we have to try and rescue. The communitarian values of African people. And for instance, respect and dignity are things which are very African, but they're being lost in the rough. And they are very much part of us. So there's a lot to salvage, but you need students of law and African culture to carefully try and craft something that would bind, for instance, the Zulu nation. It's going to be a difficult task, but similarly, something that would bind people who speak Sepedi, or maybe who speak Setswana. So there are too many differences, too many fractures, too many practices which are separate. And that is why we have no indigenous common law. And that's a weakness in our arrangements. Okay?
No, I hear you, Prof. Justice Musenege, if you still had 10 years on the bench, what else do you think you would have changed? Or you would have at least advocated for it to be changed within the judiciary?
It's a brilliant question, actually. It's quite a brilliant question. I've always thought about what I would change in the Constitution, but I haven't quite thought about what to change if I had another 10 years on the bench. The one certain thing is, and which we did a bit in our time, I want expediency. Expedient outcomes. I want things to be done properly, quickly, efficiently, so that people must get outcomes. I think that is something that is, delay is one of the worst things that you can impose on people, waiting for courts to decide.
That's why people are afraid of stepping aside.
Yes, indeed. It's not just become way too low. For instance, many people who have been charged are still not being properly indicted. They're still not being had trials go on. They're still not. So the minute you charge somebody, of course, you tag them. And you mobilize them in many ways. So it's very important that I would, if I had anything in 10 years to do, and if I was your Chief Justice, I would have moved the system and the much harder, much faster. I would have been the proponent of swift justice so that we can get, and it can be done.
I'm happy to hear that.
It can be done. Really, we are really, so it is one of the impediments. The second thing is the support services for courts to work. Remember, courts are passive. Courts receive the docket. Courts can continue only if the prosecution and the defense can continue. You can't see there's a judge and they say, we are not ready, we can't go on, and you say, we're going on. There comes a time when you can order them, but it comes quite late in the day because you don't want people to say, I did not have a proper trial or a fair trial. But for instance, in my time, one of the biggest angers I had, and I fought with the police, was the pathology laboratories. If somebody's raped now, the specimen, outcomes of specimen come after 12 months, 18 months. Is it the same specimen? Was it properly preserved? Was it kept in a medium that would give you accurate and reliable results? People get arrested for drunken driving. There are no specimens that come to court timelessly because our laboratories have collapsed. It's just an example. And laboratories are run by the police. So you can see that there are a number of things which are broken, particularly around criminal justice, that really need to be done effectively. There was a time when, in fact, nobody wanted those things to work because people wanted crime to thrive. Even the criminals wanted, even the gangs wanted the system not to work. Politicians wanted the system not to work, etc. So institutions matter, and we should get all our young people, those BScs and BSc honors, the children you train, a TUT must go out there and get jobs immediately and get into our laboratories and test those sperms, the hair and rape specimen and all the other specimen to make sure that our women and children are protected. I mean, those are examples of that. But we're not doing enough of that, and we need, therefore, strong institutions, and the costs will be better. 80% of the cases are postponed because the police are not ready, and the prosecutors are not ready. And for that long, courts can't do anything and they get why are they postponing? But in fact, they can't go on if the cases are not ready. It's not in the interest of justice to go on when there's been somebody has been raped, there's been no proper investigation, no proper evidence before the court. Then the attacker will be found not guilty. So in many ways, we have to all rise and go and build those institutions if the dream is not to be deferred forever.
We must rise.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Justice Emeritus Dikgang Moseneke. Last question before I ask Prof.
Past 5.
Yeah, just last question.
Time for the elderly, the elderly sleep early.
I know. My mother sleeps early these days, and she's 70. The last one would be, you were 15, you got arrested. Now you are an elder.
Yes.
What would you say to that 15-year-old today, the young Dikgang Moseneke?
I would go, well done. Well done. I would say, repeat exactly everything, every chapter and verse. I would have very little to be, ashamed of. There are certain things that, of course, I've not, and we as a nation have not achieved. That depresses me. That's my real depression of the adult revolutionary, because the dream has truly been betrayed and truly depressed. Those questions have been asked, yes. The dream has been betrayed, has been depressed, has been, deferred, and I'm afraid we have to start all over again.
Yeah, no.
So that's the pain. If you want to know the pain, that is my ultimate pain. But otherwise, I would repeat every endeavor I've tried to do up to now.
No, even for myself at TUT, Justice Dikgang Moseneke, well done. Well done for writing this wonderful book. Like I said earlier, we'll keep our promise. And Prof. Masrimule also said it, that even within the context of the law department, they will use your books as part of the content so that our young people can be inspired. We are truly inspired. When we look at you, we can see that there is hope for our country. And then we can also promise you, as young people in our country, that we will pick up the spears. We are learning from you, and then we will indeed rise. And then we'll encourage all our young people in the university and elsewhere in society to also rise. Do not just become comfortable when you see things being wrong. Don't just text, don't just like, don't just dislike. Rise and do something about it. Prof. Masrimule, do you want to make, I'll give you 1 minute just to make your final comments, and then we allow Justice to say goodbye to our audience, and then we close it off.
Thank you so much, Kuku. I can only say what a wonderful evening we had. It was a great pleasure to talk to Justice Dikgang Moseneke. The interactions were great. They were so much intellectually stimulating, And like as you pointed out, we are actually giving him our word that we will all rise. Thank you so much, Justice Moseneke, and good evening.
Thank you very much, Prof. Justice, do you want to say your departing shots, sir?
Yes, very, very briefly. Professor Masrumula, and thank you, Wena Kaba. I appreciate the effort, the invitation. Where I've had webinars on this book, I've donated to other universities 30 copies of All Rise for each university, but I haven't donated to TUT. And I hereby now let it be known that I'm going to donate 30 copies of All Rise to the university. And the university will use it the way they have mentioned a while ago. If they want to add to that, they're welcome, but this will be to your library. And I will have sent somebody with the logistics, my email address, so that we can arrange to have them collected and delivered at the university library. And thank you to all who listened. And we must love our country. We must be patriotic and trust and hope that the dream will not be deferred forever. And promise each other that we will rise. Even within your own organization, you can rise and say, I'm unhappy. Let's do things properly. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is it. From all the people who have joined us on all our platforms, may God bless you. Let us rise. The meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Baba.
Good night to you. It's bedtime for the elderly now. I'm gone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sia. Thank you, everybody, for organizing. Thank you, our technical team. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Christot. And thank you, Professor Mashupe Masremule. God bless you all.
Thank you, Chris. Amen. Yeah, it did. It did. It was a very good one. But you're a genius with these gadgets, Chris. Like